Welcome to the demo of Squire Merch. Squire Merch is a NetSuite application developed by Squire Technology that helps companies reconcile and post the payout activity resulting from credit card payments from customers on a web store. Merch is used by consumer product companies selling goods or software through a web store. It's especially valuable when high volumes of transactions are processed. And as we know, typically the reconciliation between the transactions captured by the payment processor and the payments and refunds posted in NetSuite is either an extremely laborious endeavor, often carried out in a spreadsheet by accounting or finance as they match up transaction by transaction, or it is just not reconciled at all as we rely on high-level reconciliation to ascertain what's in float at any given time. Some of the challenges we face in this reconciliation typically is that we're transacting within a web store, and those transactions in the web store and in the accounting systems are typically recorded at the gross sales amount. But the payment processor is often netting out fees, offsetting chargebacks, and depositing into our bank account in a lump sum representing a batch of transactions, net of those offsets. So we have this kind of gross to net gap that makes manual reconciliation extremely difficult, not to mention time zone issues, float. Some of those transactions remain in float longer than others. There's just a lot of nuance involved inside that black box of that payment processor. So Squire Merch was built for this purpose. Merch will not only reconcile all your credit card transactions, it will also consider the chargebacks, fees, and offsets, and will post a net lump sum deposit into your bank GL account at the same amount captured by your bank, which allows your bank reconciliation to flow smoothly. Squire Merch works with all the major credit card payment processors, as well as other processors like Go Cardless, PayPal, Hyperwallet, and other payment methods you might accept through your web store. So Squire Merch does three things primarily that are depicted here in this flow chart. So number one, Merch imports credit card payments, refunds, fees, chargebacks, and all of these transactions processed by your payment processor, imports them into NetSuite as a non-posting transaction that represents each payment and refund, but also a record that represents the settlement and payout activity. We have transactions that maybe are in their local currency and settled in a different currency, maybe USD. And so that creates an additional nuance of foreign currency conversion at a rate that is determined by the payment processor and likely differs from any conversion rates stored in your inside of NetSuite. And so Merch accounts for those variances and uses the actual exchange rates in its conversion. But so number one, again, Merch imports transactions from your payment processor to NetSuite, non-posting. It supports high volumes of transactions that may go through each day. And that can also be performed via CSV upload, but typically we have our API connection do all the work for you. Second function of Squire Merch is to reconcile. So each transaction that comes into the Squire Merch application within NetSuite is reconciled to its corresponding payment or refund that is posted to the general ledger in NetSuite, right? So this is assuming we have an integration with our e-commerce platform, our web store, whereby we are importing payments and refunds into NetSuite, typically at a high volume or low volume. But these transactions will get paired up by Squire Merch. They will be linked to each other so that we can link back and forth to each other. And as part of that reconciliation process, it will identify if there are any missing transactions from your web store integration. We've had many clients who use this as a way to identify what transactions are falling through the cracks through their web store integration, and helps them resolve that for order management purposes, not just the financial reconciliation. So there's an added benefit there. Any transactions that are pending or not found initially will continue to listen for those. It's a kind of companion transaction in the system, so that once the payment or refund is added to NetSuite, it'll automatically be reconciled and the batch will complete. The third function of Squire Merch is to carry out the deposit. So all of the payments and refunds coming from the web store are posted to a clearing or undeposited funds account within NetSuite. And Squire Merch will then use the payout information from the payment processor to determine which transactions are part of that batch, that lump sum deposit that we get on a regular basis from our payment processor. Once it identifies what transactions are part of that payout, and it identifies that all the transactions are existent in NetSuite, it will create a bank deposit in NetSuite, net of chargebacks, net of fees, and that lump sum amount should match the amount on our bank statement as a deposit. It will account for the fees and chargebacks, posting them to the appropriate GL account as defined in your initial setup. So that summarizes the three functions of Squire Merch. It imports non-posting transactions for purposes of reconciliation. It reconciles and matches the transactions and provides exception reports to you. And it will ultimately deposit to the GL account to tidy up our accounting. So let's jump into NetSuite and we can take a look at what this looks like. So let's jump into NetSuite, and you can see the Squire Merch application dashboard summarizes the transactions and the flow of these transactions into Squire Merch from the payment processor, or many different payment processors. You can see here that we have a summary of recent activity, how many payouts have been processed, how many errors have been recognized. We can see any kind of in-process batches that are pending or in process. But what we can see down below is that we have one batch that has an error, and we can see some transactional errors that you can see this is related to that batch. We must be missing a transaction here. And you can see the transaction reconciliation error would indicate there's a missing transaction in this batch. So it's kind of parked this batch, and it's awaiting resolution here. We can also see any payments and refunds without a merch link. So it goes both ways. Are there any payments or refunds associated with a payment processor posted in NetSuite that we don't see from the payment processor data? And are there any transactions from the payment processor that we don't see posted in NetSuite against the GL? So Squire Merch will recognize both sides and surface these exceptions to you for resolution. Okay, so let's take a look at one of these payout batch records. You can see here that this payout batch comes with an ID. This comes from the payment processor. This one we are pulling from Stripe. We have the settlement currency in USD, and you can see that various transactions came through in different currencies than the settlement currency, which is totally fine. Squire Merch will take care of this. And you can see this, it's settled at 1548, for example. That was transacted in 20 Canadian dollars. So this is the actual settlement amount from the payment processor based off the rates, exchange rates used by the payment processor, not by your accounting system, which is a key component to make sure this reconciles properly. The total in USD is 68.85. And you'll see here that we are offsetting fees as part of this batch. There were no chargebacks, but had there been, those would be offset as well. And so we have 68.85 in our settlement total, less the 1082, and that's where we get a net batch total in the settlement currency of 5803. Okay, so number one, we have a complete data set, which is important here from our payment processor. And then you can see that it reconciled all of these individual transactions to a NetSuite posted transaction, either a payment or customer refund or customer deposit, cash sale, whatever transaction type you're using within NetSuite, it'll reconcile to that and link the transactions back and forth to each other. Let's go back to the dashboard. You'll notice here that here's a payout that is missing a transaction. And so you can see here one of the transactions that relate to that same payout batch for 1074 is missing its corresponding transaction within NetSuite. So once this, we can resolve through our web store and record this payment in NetSuite. Once this payment's recorded, it will actually recognize this payment, automatically link it together, update the status of this payout batch, and make the deposit all automatically. Okay, so the goal here is eliminate as much manual effort as we can, and that's the process it goes through. But once all the transactions are recognized, it will create a bank deposit into depository account. All of this is defined as part of the setup. You'll see that the net amount of the deposit is 5803. We had a series of payments totaling 6885. These same payments we have identified here. Okay, these 12 or so payments here. And then you can see that we're offsetting by 1082. We're coding that against our merchant fees account. And so that completes the deposit. Again, all of this happens automatically based off the Squire Merch application routines that are run on a regular basis throughout the day.